Hi there, and welcome back. You're listening to the Everglade Chronicles, a reading. I'm Garrett Shave, the author. Today I'll be reading Chapter 7, There Will Be Blood. War is coming to the meadow. Can Jessica and her friends stop it? Let's find out. When I came to the park on Wednesday after school, a guard was checking cards. I passed him my ID and he looked it over carefully. "You are admitted," he said robotically. By this time everyone had received their cards. To me, it was a harsh reality of how Venus was keeping track of us all. As I walked towards my village, there were soldiers doing training exercises in the open field beyond the bush that lined the path. At this rate, the Lost Forest would stand no chance. What little garrison they had were likely kept off guard by Crest's stupidity. They would be outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Little Hudson wasn't there when I arrived, but Ben was. He was looking frantic. "They patted me down on the bridge," Ben raged. "Common soldiers touching the mayor. This new security system is all stupid. It says here my clearance number is only 5. 5! I'm a mayor, for crying out loud." "It's like herding sheep into a den of lions," I replied sourly. "Where is his grace?" "At home, I'm assuming. It is only Wednesday." I nodded and glanced around. There were a few young kids working hard in the field, and a few others chatting near the wicker throne. I could hear the soldiers training nearby. "They've set up a restricted area just north of here," Ben said suddenly. "I tried to go and investigate, but I'm only a 5. My sister said only level 10 can gain access. I'm only an 8. Ben's eyes grew wide. "How did you get an 8? "I'm a member of the upper gentry, I suppose," I half laughed. "Plus my sister is a general, you know." Ben sighed deeply. "Still, I'd like to know why there is a classified military area north of here. I thought the Lost Forest was their priority." "I wouldn't be surprised if it was all just smoke and mirrors, old friend. Venus is trying to instill some fear into us, even those at the other end of the spectrum." "I heard a rumor there was a meeting this weekend," a voice said suddenly. I turned around rapidly, noticing Catherine, the ginger Irish spy. "Where did you come from?" Ben asked, alarmed. "Wherever there are whispers, we are always there to hear," her brother said, stepping out from behind a large tree. I nearly fainted, panting heavily. Those two were quite good at their game after all. "What meeting?" I asked, trying not to seem startled. They stood side by side, twins. Folding their arms behind their backs, they smiled. They looked entirely like the same person. "We've only heard so much," Cale began. "Hardly enough to pass off as truth," Catherine continued. "Queen Venus is summoning us all for a large gathering," Cale said. "Must be a declaration of war or something," Cat added with a small smile. "If we are all destined to be there, it must be something big like that," I mumbled, thinking. "You mustn't tell a soul, not even your bratty lord," Cale said, bringing a finger to his lips. "You two talk so creepily," Ben growled, moving his fingers like a ghost scaring someone. "We like to remain mysterious," Catherine yawned. "From what we have gathered, notes will be sent out, like a formal invite," her brother said. "Your spoiled lord will likely have one in his possession before the week is out." "Attendance is mandatory, so the Lord Schuyler declares." "Won't this be exciting?" I sighed. "Time to head off," Catherine declared. The two of them jumped into a bush, and that was the last we heard of them. "I'll see you this weekend, Ben. I'm headed home," I said, feeling buzzed. I had so much on my mind. If this weekend was to bring a mandatory meeting, it could only mean something bad. I had to be prepared in case something evil went down. Throughout the week, I couldn't think. I had a math test that I probably failed, and I couldn't get my sister to reveal any intel. Friday rolled around and it was a refreshingly hot day. We all took off our jackets and made for the meadow. I never seemed to arrive early enough because there was always a guard or two on the bridge checking ID. I was 5th in line when my friend and fellow agent Cora Hastings was pulled aside. They had yanked her so rudely, almost as if she were no one. I leaned in, listening closely. She seemed to have forgotten her card, that or lost it. For some reason they weren't permitting the royal attendant to Lady Chloe to enter the meadow. They had seen her 100 times before, but because she had forgotten her card, she wasn't allowed in. "I demand to speak to your supervisor," she was yelling. The line moved swiftly, and as the guard was checking my card, one of the Queen's personal soldiers arrived. He was a tall ninth grader carrying a Halloween axe and wearing an omnipotent amount of jet-black armor. Boy, did he look formidable. "What is the problem?" he asked sharply. "Cora there has forgotten her card," I said. "They won't let her in." "Devon, you know who I am," Cora said sternly. "I forgot my card at home. My security level is 8, and I am a direct relation to House Mountbatten, the house I so proudly serve." Devon, the ninth grader, looked embarrassed. Sometimes these soldiers get so carried away in their work they forget the gentry. "Cora, please forgive them. I will speak with Lord Schuyler." I walked with Cora across the bridge, and we could hear the formidable Devon yelling at his inferiors. When we crossed, we pretended to exchange words as Devon passed swiftly. "I don't know if anyone has told you yet, but there is a mandatory meeting tomorrow," she whispered in my ear. "The Queen is formally declaring war, and anyone who is related to the Lost Forest Crest regime will be arrested at the meeting. It is rather unfortunate. She is also calling the age-old practice of to arms." "Good gravy!" I nearly yelled. "To arms?" This is indeed disturbing news. To arms was an ageless practice and nearly forgotten from the royal constitution. It was a formal and rather obligatory call of all able-bodied children to war. It meant she could yank anyone, any kid or teen from any part of the meadow, into her army. Cora nodded bleakly. "The only way the practice can be dismissed is if the ruling nobility vote against it. However, I doubt there will be enough votes to negate it." "We are truly doomed," I said sadly. "Tyler will be thrust from power, Mark will be blamed, and Venus will achieve her goddess status and rule us all to death." "I've got to go," Cora said quickly. "I will see you tomorrow." I nodded as she hurried off. I walked slowly to the village, half waving at the little kids in the field. They were working hard, and soon there would be swords thrust into their little hands. A military patrol passed me as I walked, and one guard checked my ID. When I reached the village, His Grace was impatiently waiting for me. Ben was already there, looking troubled. "There was a note from the Crown," Hudson remarked. "There will be a gathering tomorrow in the royal city. All citizens of Everglade are expected to attend." "I will be there, Your Grace," I said, bowing. "Of course you will, Mistress Walker. You are my attendant." Hudson sat his little bottom on his wicker throne and looked out across the meadow. "What a lovely day to be a duke," he said robustly. "I've just told our little friend here, Benjamin, that mayoral rights have been dismissed. He is now my chief groomsman, no longer the trivial mayor of this tiny village." I nearly dropped, so out of breath. Benjamin's position of mayor had gone up in smoke. He looked as dire and sick as I did, only he kept his composure. I felt the world spinning around me. Sunset is too small for a mayor. So now he will serve me. At least his security clearance has risen. "If that is what your grace commands," I managed to stammer, recovering from my bout of insanity. Hudson drummed his fingers. "That is what I command. Lest you little insects go against me, you will all be in my good books. I am not like my brother at all. Sunset is mine now, and there is a new reign, a new dawn, my dear Jessica." "Yes, Your Grace," was all I could manage. The following day at school, my mind was racing. I couldn't focus on my science test, and I feared I would fail it. The teacher and the other students kept looking at me. It was only till later that I realized I was fidgeting wildly with my sparkly pens, and everyone had heard the clicking noise. At my locker, I noticed William Shepherd dodging through the halls. I held my biology book close to me and watched him. He did not stop to chat. I do not think he even saw me. The afternoon was tough on me as well. I sat in a study group in the library, watching the clock more than paying attention to David reading about his Osiris and Anubis reports. It was already almost 2, and the clock seemed to be ticking quickly. The infamous meadow meeting was tonight, and Cora's words echoed through my mind. She is calling to arms. "Are you all right, Jess?" A voice snapped me into reality. I blinked quickly and glanced over at my schoolmate Clarice through my glasses. "Yes," I sighed. "I'm quite all right." Just thinking about some stuff." "You should consider your Egyptian project more," David snuffed, putting his book down. "You were hardly listening when I was reading that excerpt." "My project is coming along nicely, thank you," I growled. In truth, it was mostly done. Isis had captivated me so much, I had worked extremely hard to finish my report on her. "It's almost 2, David said. "Class will be starting soon. Let's go." I walked home swiftly and in silence. Abby wasn't there yet, but I quickly tossed my books aside and went to my room. I spent some time looking at myself in the mirror, adjusting my glasses, combing my hair and pouting my lips. I applied some dark purple lipstick and decided it was time to go. I did not know what to expect, only war. "I knew I could hear someone upstairs," my sister said as I descended into the kitchen. "Are you ready to go to the meadow? Caitlin has some news." I inhaled deeply. "I am very much ready, sister. Ready to hear what the Queen has to say." Abigail looked at me. I could see some slight resemblance in her studying face. She almost wore a look of concern. "You seem frightened," she said. "I've got a lot on my plate," I replied smoothly. "My friend Ben was demoted, and all I hear are rumors of war and oppression. I am just worried about what the Queen has to say." Abby touched my arm and smiled. "You'll be fine, I promise." I knew she was wrong, but Ryan had probably twisted her arm. Children in such high-ranking military positions are sworn to keep oath and forbidden to tell any secrets. Even my own sister could not reveal the Queen's true intent. It was only fortunate I had already known. Considering it was now May, the sun was kept longer in the sky. It was only until later it would finally dip and we would see moonlight. The royal city was bustling with activity, and security at the gate had been waived since attendance was mandatory. The poorest to the richest were here, including Madison and her group of farmers, Chloe Mountbatten and her entourage, and an emissary from Cassidy's spy group were also shuffling around like vultures. Abigail had to leave me to join the soldiers. I stood aside, looking for the Duke. I couldn't help but notice the large amount of security at the event. Certainly it was a royal affair, and the Queen had to be protected, but this was a little excessive. I passed a servant handing out little Dixie cups of lemonade and swiped one. Sipping on it, I continued to scan for His Grace. The lemonade was unusually sweet that night. "There you are, Mistress Walker," the Duke said from behind me. I quickly turned around and swooped into a bow. "I have been looking for you." "A pleasure to see your Grace," I said quickly. Hudson looked unimpressed with the gathering and watched the others snobbishly. Around him stood some other gentry from Sunset, including a depressed Benjamin. I went to him immediately. "This is going to be a bad meeting," he mumbled. "We must stay positive," I urged him. A short moment later, a short 6th grader began humming into a bright blue plastic bugle. "Attention, attention," he called out. "I present to you all fine citizens of Everglade, Her Majesty Queen Venus." Queen Caitlin looked rather radiant in her ensemble. Dressed in a flowery dress, she wore a king's velvet Halloween cape from her shoulders that draped the grass. Atop her head, she wore the fabled plastic crown of Everglade, and her lips were smoothed with pink gloss. She had white satin gloves on, and a red sash across her chest. She smiled brightly as the crowd clapped, but I could see uneasy looks on most faces. She looked positively regal. The rest of her aristocracy joined next to her. Amidst the statuesque guards she kept at her side. Lord Schuyler was looking regal, wearing a suit of plastic armor that resembled a Roman soldier. Lady Chloe had matching satin gloves on with a sparkly fake tiara in her hair. Lord Ashton was flaunting his status with his studded cane, overly gaudy plastic rings, and red felt Robin Hood hat with a feather protruding from it. Lady Alice wore a lace black dress, waving robotically. They all looked so happy up there, too, waving at the audience. I figured this main exhibit of utter status was to display the power and opulence of the monarchy. Essentially, we cannot be touched. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Queen said loudly, raising her hands to quiet the clapping, "I am so glad you could all come. It seems to me that most of you are here. That's great news, for I want you all to hear what I have to say. I could feel the guards around us squeeze in. Rapidly, my eyes darted about. They eventually focused on an emissary from the Lost Forest. Tyler Crest had a dental appointment and could not come to the meeting. The forest kids wore dark green armbands and often had burlap capes to distinguish themselves from the other. It was probably for the best, because the soldiers were moving in. Venus was babbling on about the economy and how every person's effort counted in the long run. She touched on the excess of the military, as well as the purpose of identification slips. My eyes never wavered from the foreign troop. It brings great admiration that I must announce the next great news, Venus said with a smile. I could feel myself sweating, and when I looked over at Ben, he looked queasy. Beginning this weekend, I wish to express the immediate command of "To arms!" Most of the senior crowd gasped. Much of the younger children would not know its definition, but those who had prior knowledge of it were shocked. There was a buzz of talking before the Queen called for silence. It took several seconds before we were all quieted again. All able-bodied children from all parts of the meadow will be recruited, Lord Schuyler stepped in to speak. You will have to leave your homes and your work to fight for Her Majesty. What is the meaning of this? I could hear the former valet to Gabrielle shout. We are not at war. Queen Venus smiled devilishly. The Lost Forest has disobeyed their anointed sovereign. The acts of the Acorn attack earlier this month have not been forgotten, and justice shall prevail in my realm. The territory to the east of us must be purged and recollected in an effort to expel all treason. This is preposterous, a lad named Matthew called out. That incident was isolated and carried out by a selective few who are not loyal to the crown. But it was already too late. The army had moved in and arrests were made. The group tried to scatter, but the excessive military force kept us tight like cows in a corral. I could see my sister giving orders as the Queen gloated from her raised position. There was yelling and screaming as the guards plowed over. Not only were forest kids arrested, but several others were too. This means war, Lord Schuyler was yelling to the audience. During the chaos, I slipped away from the Duke and Ben. I looked frantically around, trying to find the members of Sassy Cassie's group, but they were gone. You must all be quiet now, Lord Ashton hollered. The Queen's word is law. There shall be war. The crowd would not quell as long as the guards were afoot, scattering the people. Over here, a voice from a bush beckoned me. I slipped inside the leaves and found myself face to face with Cassidy, looking rather cramped in the small bush. I've been watching, she said. This is disgusting. It's also what we predicted. Tyler Crest is doomed. A little friend of mine told me where Mark was, and I rescued him. Is he safe? I was afraid he would be one of those arrested. He is safe, thank goodness, Sassy Cassie breathed. This destruction has only just begun. We must help the forest for Gabrielle's sake. I do not know how long this arms call will last, I admitted. Cora told me the only way to stop it is if the ruling nobility vote against it. It seems they are all for it, though. Indeed, Cassidy replied, thinking deeply. The most we can do is rally our own army, but no one would follow me. For now, I suppose, I will divert all efforts to helping the forest. Matthew is an old friend of mine, and an old friend of Gabrielle's. I will do it for her. I nodded and slipped out of the bush to find that the crowd was quiet. Only a few people remained, mostly those who worked in the royal city. The rest had been diverted by the large number of soldiers. Caitlin and her crew were nowhere to be found. Are you all right, sister? I could hear Abby calling for me. I looked over at her, a foam sword clutched at her belt. She was with some junior soldiers, kids who looked hungry for action. I'm fine, of course, I sighed. I knew something like this would happen. It is for the good of the kingdom, Abigail declared. Crest has to be expelled. He isn't doing a good enough job at keeping the treason and the heretics down. The forest is Sinclair country, and we cannot have those poisons seeping into the minds of the rest of the population. Surely you must agree, Jess? I stared at my sister. This would be the breaking point for us. Gabrielle's will had been desecrated when she left, tossed aside and her heir replaced. The replacing of such an heir was the cause of all this. Mark Glass was the true Duke of the Lost Forest, and all this support for Gabrielle's true heir had surfaced. In the face of Venus, it was nothing but petty treason. Caitlin had always been jealous of Gabrielle. I suppose if we must do this, then it is right. After all, the Queen's will is law. I lied. Abigail smiled. She had been brainwashed by the military into believing that Caitlin was some goddess, and her power was absolute. While she was the ruling queen, it was unfair. Venus was moving to secure her claim over the entire island, and it seemed no one could stop her. It was probably the luckiest thing for Tyler Crest to need an emergency root canal on this day. That concludes Chapter 7, our readings for this week. The sisterly rivalry between Jessica and Abigail will only intensify. And do you think Queen Venus will really get her way? Join us next time when we start Chapter 8, A True Spruce Battle. Shimmer by Captures provides the music. Find us online on Facebook by searching The Everglade Chronicles or at Everglade Chronicles on Instagram. I appreciate your support. If you're interested in purchasing any of the Everglade Chronicles novels, you can find them exclusively on Amazon. Thank you and see you next week.